Welcome to Shrinks Sharing. I'm Dr. Sayeda Rukshida. I'm a psychiatrist and I'm based here in Mumbai, India.
Hi, I'm Dr. Vilona Annunciation, and I'm a psychiatrist also working in Mumbai, India.
Today we're going to talk about generalized anxiety disorder. We use the word anxiety very commonly. Oh, I'm anxious. I'm getting super anxious about it. I was having a panic attack. So that's why we thought that it's very important for us to understand what is an anxiety disorder and what's anxiety. So, Vilona, how would you kind of differentiate between the two? What is like just a like regular everyday anxiety, and what would be like, let's say, a pathological anxiety?
So, anxiety, in very simple words, is worry. It's just that the worry sometimes gets a little unreasonable in particular times, especially when we're uh, probably just about to go for an exam or an important interview, or we're waiting to hear the results of some test. It's just that uneasy, uncomfortable, restless feeling that we get, and all of us go through anxiety at some point of time or the other. But that's anxiety. That's just the normal worry that we feel. Uh, Apart from this, we also see a lot of times that people go through a more severe form of anxiety or more difficult type of worry, which they're not able to shake off. And that's when we come in the picture. So, Dr. Rukshida, why don't you tell us how you look at anxiety, or how do you diagnose anxiety when a patient with anxiety comes in front?
So when a person comes in, right, I will ask them certain questions. What's going on? So sometimes they will just say that I'm just scared. Sometimes they will use the word scared instead of anxious. So then we have to ask them a lot of other questions. So we have to like kind of divide that. Okay, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? And what is your body going through? Right? Because if we divide these kind of symptoms like that, it becomes easier for the person also to concentrate. Okay, what's happening in your, is there breathlessness or is there palpitations? Can you feel your heart race once in a while? And can you feel like some people might have other bodily symptoms like giddiness or nausea even, and sometimes like even like an irritable bowel syndrome where they either have a gas or they have constipation or they have just loose motions as such. Other physical symptoms can be tremors or just occasionally feeling cold clammy hands. A lot of the times people will talk about I rub my eyes a lot too much nowadays because there's dryness of eyes, possibly there's dryness of mouth, and they keep jugging water. So those can be physical symptoms. There can be a lot of different symptoms and different people, so we kind of have to ask them through all of that. Something else happens, do you have a pain or do you have a restlessness? A lot of the times people will also come and say that I'm thinking a lot. It's as if my thoughts are just racing and I'm thinking too much. It's just about anything and everything. So those like extra thinking, not being able to stop thinking, not being able to distract yourself, those are again like a lot of the times people will come and tell us. They'll tell us that I think so much that because of that I'm not being able to sleep, so it impacts their sleep. As far as like how you describe that extreme sense of nervousness or extreme sense of like I don't know what's going to happen, but I know something's going to happen, that dread literally. That restlessness and that nervousness that somebody feels. So like when we are nervous and then we are super nervous because it's an important exam, to when we are anxious and when we are very anxious. And when we talk about generalized anxiety disorder, a lot of them know, a lot of the people will come and tell you, right, that it's almost always there. It's there in the back of my mind, and I just can't seem to be like, just even if I'm doing something, I'm concentrating on my work, but I know there's something going on in the back of my mind. So a lot of the times people will ask you, a lot of the times people will come and like describe all of these things to you. And but also sometimes you do have to ask certain questions, because of course they might have noticed something but they will not kind of remember, or they might not have noticed at all, and we kind of have to like then figure out, okay, what all other possibilities are there. And sometimes these symptoms change, right? So like they start with worrying about something, one particular thing, then they might start worrying about something else later. So it's not like a constant worry as well, right? So how do you like what are the kind of questions that you ask, like to elicit these kind of symptoms? What would you ask?
So, I usually start by asking them what is the worry that is predominantly on their mind. So, if it is a specific anxiety, they would describe that. But with generalized anxiety, most of the times they have Worry is about everyday things, like small, small things that have been happening throughout the day, things that sometimes are not even in their control, but they keep worrying about it and constantly thinking about it. So this causes them a lot of restlessness and a lot of uneasiness. And I then take them through a number of physical symptoms such as difficulty with breathing, palpitations, trembling of hands, sweating. Sometimes the entire body starts trembling, or sometimes they might feel an uneasiness in the pit of the stomach. Sometimes they might feel like they have to go to the washroom. And usually there would be like 4 or 5 of these symptoms present along with the worry that is predominantly there at the back of their mind. So when they describe the kind of symptoms that they are experiencing along with the worry, I'm able to then understand whether or not it is an anxiety disorder. And of course, I always check to see whether it is impacting their functioning, whether it is making them avoid doing something or avoid going out or avoid interacting with certain people so that their anxiety settles down. And I also check if it's interfering with their sleep and appetite and passing urine and stools. These are common things that I check with my patients to make sure that they're doing okay.
So when you were also saying that, okay, these are the kind of checklists that you also go through, how do you explain to them that why is this happening? Because a lot of the times the relatives will also be with them, right? And they'll say that, but I also told her or told him that this is a natural thing. Of course, all of us are worried about, but she just worries about it too much, or he doesn't let it go. So how do you explain that it's a disorder? Like, what do you say to them that makes either them or the people that are with them that it's a disorder and not just something that they can stop thinking?
So, what actually manages to convince them, I think, is the fact that they understand that it is unreasonable, but they can't control it. So, a lot of times the relatives are able to tell me that हम समझा रहे हैं, but the person is not understanding. And I keep telling them that if you are explaining it to them and they're still not able to understand, there must be something that is going wrong, right? Nobody would do it purposely. So that seems to click, or that seems to strike a chord and help them understand that the person may not actually be doing it purposely. That helps. Another thing that helps is telling them that there are certain chemical abnormalities that are in play. So when I talk about serotonin and the imbalance that is happening, which is contributing to the anxiety, and how the medications will actually help in improving the concentration of serotonin, they are then able to attribute it to a chemical disturbance rather than a fault of the person. So then they become a lot more comfortable and a lot more open to the idea that, okay, this is not something that is happening because the person is trying to do it, but because the person has absolutely no control over it and it's happening. So instead of blaming the person, or instead of pinpointing that why is this happening to you, they need to be more understanding, and they need to probably try and help them um, take make sure that they take the treatment properly so that they recover fast. So what are your treatment strategies, Rukshida ma'am? What do you do when the patient
you
comes
brought
in?
up you brought up a very nice point that the psychoeducation, like when we're educating or informing the patient or their caregivers or loved one or social support, that's the first step of treatment, isn't it? So that if they understand that the disorder from a scientific model, even they understand that, okay, this, they're not supposed to be blamed, or so then they feel a little bit of sense of kind of control. Because a lot of times they'll come and say, I don't know why this is happening, and I tell them, you know why this is happening. You know that you have an anxiety disorder, and you have the GAD, the generalized anxiety disorder, and this is the symptom of that disorder. So when they like, oh, because in a lot of the times with anxiety, they feel that they're not in control necessarily, right? So when they feel that the next time I get like this anxious, or I'm thinking and overthinking, and if I just remind myself that, oh, this is happening because this is a symptom of GAD, so that goes a long way in kind of like calming them down from day one practically. And as far as the treatment plan is concerned, you brought up anxiety related medications, and of course we recognize that medications has a huge space in treating GAD. Of course sometimes when it's like a mild form of GAD, depending on various other factors, like if there is no family history of either, any kind of psychiatric illness, or if this is a high functioning person, or if the symptoms of GAD are not as long last, like, the duration is not very long, then maybe we could attempt to only do some amount of psychotherapy, and not, not just counseling, but psychotherapy as such. But if it's anywhere between mild to moderate or moderate to severe, we must talk about medications. And a lot of the times when we see that generalized anxiety disorder is not just there by itself. They'll either have like a secondary depressive disorder, or like a mixed anxiety depressive disorder, or sometimes there's like also panic attacks or some specific phobias that they're going through. And we don't need to differentiate whether we're talking about, is it a GAD, is it like OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, or something else. So once we have recognized that, okay, this is GAD and the diagnosis is okay, we do sit down and start with a treatment plan. The most commonly used medications like SSRIs, and I do kind of take them through it in terms of how long they might need to take, or if they do get very anxious, what are they supposed to be doing. So what are the side effects that they might possibly have, because if you just preempt these kind of questions, they automatically are a little bit more concerned, because the person who has generalized anxiety disorder, they're more anxious about taking medications. Okay, I want to take medications because this is enough, and this is, I'm exhausted and I can't do this forward. So when we do talk about medications and explain it to them in a way that is sounds reasonable, sounds understandable, and you kind of like give them a plan, and they feel again a little bit more in control. Are there any kind of like, usually like on a regular basis, any blood tests or any scans or something else that you generally tell them to do? Because you know that people with anxiety disorders, because they have so many bodily symptoms, they want to come and like tell you that, should I do this, should I do this, should I do this? How do you handle that?
So I usually request for some blood tests when the patient comes in to me for the first time, because, as you know, patients with hypothyroidism can present as anxiety. So it is important that we need to look at, medical conditions that could be contributing to the anxiety, and see what we can do to ensure that the patient is not, is actually taken care of in in the medical aspect, as well as the psychiatric treatment part of it. So I make sure that I take some blood tests, like a routine CBC, the basic liver function test, making sure that the renal function tests are fine, the thyroid profile. This is done at the start. However, if the patient is somebody who has anxiety about illness and has already done like a multitude of tests and come to me, and some of the tests have been done in the recent past, I insist that they do not do any more tests, especially if everything has been covered. I tell them that now
That's
we
no
will
easy
just,
task, is it?
yeah, it is, because it's very difficult to explain to them that they don't need any more tests, and they need to just wait and just let the anxiety settle down and then decide what to do next.
Because like, especially because they have like, so many symptoms, and they seem to change all the time. And a lot of the times, unfortunately, people with GAD, they go through a long period of time where other people don't really believe it. They feel that, oh, like, why can't you just like stop thinking about it? The exam was like 1 month ago, why are you still talking about it even now, and why do you seem to be so anxious about it? So a lot of the times, because, so they start feeling as if they're alone in this, right? And then they kind of like start to kind of latch on to people or things, whatever it is that they can feel a little stabilized with. And because a lot of people, if they have a predisposing personality type, that they are anyway concerned about illness, or the fear of death is one of the highlighting features of your anxiety, then those are again times that it's very difficult for us to in fact insist, okay, instead of actually taking more medications, you're supposed to take less medications. So that balance sometimes gets really challenging, isn't it? So how do you do that? Like, how do you convince your patients that, no, you're taking far too many medications for all of these other illnesses that you don't have? How do you try and convince them for that?
So I don't try and convince them about that. Honestly, I just tell them that the anxiety is something that is playing on their mind, and fortunately, unfortunately for them, the mind is controlling the rest of the body. So if there is something going wrong with the way the mind is functioning, it can impact and it can make them experience symptoms of the body more, more acutely than others. So let's just treat the anxiety and then let's see what medications you need and what you don't. So over the longer term, it works better, because then once they start feeling more relaxed, calmer, in a better place, it's easier to tell them, okay, let's talk to your physician and see what all medicines can come off. And that works well. So of course you need to partner with the physician and you need to talk to the physician and get them on board to understand what is happening and how we're working through this. And I think with a collaboration, it can work really well.
Yeah, because we also kind of become the people that they're taking these medications, and we have one more person in their life saying that you're doing this wrong and you shouldn't be doing this, and because you so then then it's almost as if we're also part of the whole blaming party where you're doing this wrong and you're doing that right. In fact, instead of focusing on, okay, let's reduce your symptoms first so that there's more clarity of thought, and then that your emotions are a little bit more in control, your quality of life improves now, because it impacts your daily life, it impacts your thinking capacity. You want to be paying attention to something but you can't. And so many times, like, there are, because sexual anxieties, or it impacts the sexual performances as well. So that is another kind of layer of it, isn't it? And at some point, I do really want to talk about how anxiety becomes like all of a sudden so pronounced during the menopause, or during perinatal period, pregnancy, and after the delivery. So I'm hoping that we'll definitely do one session on that, and we'll talk about that in one of our episodes. So when we do talk about, we try to, like, kind of, we say that the treatment includes therapy as well as medications. Mm, how do you convince people, or what do you explain to people, whether the patients or the relatives, that if you don't treat anxiety, what's going to happen? Like, what are the possible complications that could happen, or what could it lead to? Like, what do you tell them?
So, Rukshita ma'am, honestly, by the time they've come to me, they've tried honestly everything else in their kitty. They've done everything else. They've gone to the physician, they've gone to the, local, support system that they have within their family, within their friends. They've gone to their religious support system. They've done everything practically. And then they finally come to me as a last resort. So, when I tell them that this is something that is medically treatable and can be corrected with medications, quite often they agree, because they are already going through a lot of physical symptoms of anxiety and they know that that can be disabling at times. Yes, I have had my fair share of patients who, even despite clearly explaining to them that this is what it is, this is anxiety and it needs treatment, they still say that, but what if we use therapy first, or what if we work without medications, or what if we use some alternative medications? So I'm usually very direct with them. I tell them that the best evidence that we have in terms of research is for a combination of medications and therapy. And especially for the type of anxiety that they've come to me with, especially if it's moderate or severe anxiety, it has to be a combination of medications and therapy. And if they want
What I find, so I sorry, sorry to interrupt, but what I find also, like, a lot of the times, that they buy because they take, for some reason or the other, due to a lot of reasons, they end up, like you said, coming to you after a period of time. So I'm very aware that they might have either started using tobacco or alcohol or even other substances, because substance abuse as a complication of untreated anxiety, as an abuse of a substance to false kind of like hope of treating anxiety, can become like such a complicated thing, isn't it? And then we hope that it's not, initially it was only anxiety, now it's also substance abuse, so they have two morbidities and two diagnoses as such. So that's something that I am, like, kind of concerned about as well. And so I like I said, I'm sure you do your own checklist as well. But also, like, people are, like, especially caregivers, are worried about suicidal ideas and suicide attempts, really, because of anxiety. So have you come across things like that? And what do you share and how do you explain to them?
So, anxiety generally causes so much of unrest in the person that at points they might feel so hopeless or helpless that they might feel like they want to end it all. And that has happened with a few of my patients, and generally it's with a comorbid diagnosis of depression. So there is both, mixed anxiety as well as depression when they're reporting of these ideas, and I try and explore and see which is more predominant so that I can choose the medication accordingly. But also, I try and make sure that the other factors in terms of treating their insomnia, treating their appetite, making sure that their appetite comes back to normal, their energy levels improve. All of that is also taken care of by the particular medicine that I'm choosing. Especially if my patient comes back to me and says that I feel calmer, but I feel very dull. That's not something that I'm very happy about. So I want to make sure that they feel relaxed with the anxiety, while at the same time they are energetic enough to wake up the next morning and go to work because that's what they want to do, or they get up and go to college because that's their goal for that day. So that's something that I focus on. But on the note that you shared, Rukshida ma'am, uh, a lot of my patients recently have been reaching out with, I feel very anxious, and with the point of substance abuse, weed calms me down. So what do you have to say about that? What do you say to the patients who tell you that, you know what, I use weed medically to control my anxiety?
So cannabis, weed, joint, grass, whatever you want to, there are so many different words people use. I mean, we use cannabis as the scientific word. People, like I said, do self-medicate because in a lot of different parts of the world, it is also like medical marijuana and all of that, right? Unfortunately, I try and explain it to them that there is use, there is abuse, and then there is dependence. So if you're going to be using, but at the same time, if you're not doing this under medical supervision, then it is abuse. And then there is a possibility that you have not titrated the dose, or the kind of cannabis and weed that you that possibly can be medical marijuana is not something that you're using. So then you're opening up yourself to a possibility of not just having a substance problem, a disorder, abuse, or of dependence, but also maybe the cannabis in itself can increase anxiety. A lot of people don't realize that of the weed that they use as well, and that in fact backfires. So it's very important for us to kind of, I always explain it to them, especially when they're young people, because they think that this is what it is because they've read something, or and they think it's herbal, so it cannot be, and it's not like a hard drug, so you don't get habituated to it. So a lot of these kind of misconceptions, so self-medication. So I always tell them self-medication, whether that is with medicines like that you're buying from a chemist or pharmacy, or medications that you're buying from the local dealer. Both of them are a strict no. You want to do this with under the supervision of a physician, of a doctor, of a psychiatrist, so that there is a better chance of you getting better faster. And there is the intensity also reduces, but the duration also reduces, so that you can like kind of get back to your life much faster. Apart from the medications and apart from therapy, of course, I always also say that the lifestyle, the healthy routine is also a big part of treatment. So one of the first things that I say that, I really want you to try and sleep on a particular time, wake up at a particular time. I tell them, I give them sleep hygiene tips. I tell them nutritious food and balanced meal, because some of the times the food that they might be using as, stress eating, that again kind of increases their anxiety psychologically as well, because they feel they've binged, or they've done this. And I try and take them through like breathing exercises, relaxation exercises, whether you want to call it not horizontal but vertical breathing, whether you want to call it belly breathing, or just plain shavasana. Some of them, if they are interested in yoga, I try and tell them that, okay, it's a very good modality, and why don't you start with pranayam, because that also can be very, very relaxing. So what other kind of daily tips that you could possibly share today itself also with somebody who might be listening to this, that they could possibly use to reduce their anxiety?
So I think we share pretty much the same stuff. I talk to my patients as well about all of their, lifestyle modification. One of the things that I insist that they do is incorporate some sort of physical activity in their routine. So I am a huge fan of exercise. I love exercise. So I can that is something that I recommend to most of my patients, that just take your cycle and go out, or skip, or do, like now, sometimes it is very difficult to step out of the house, but within the house there are so many things that you can do, and just 30 minutes of doing something that energizes you changes your mood and makes your body so much more calmer. So you could do that just to help settle your anxiety. Of course, that's not a replacement for medicines, but that's like an adjunct. So you can use it as support to the medicines that you're taking. You can use it as a support to the therapy. It can be part of the retraining of your mind to calm down and relax and deal with anxiety provoking stimuli in a more relaxed fashion. So this is one additional thing that I tell them.
Right. And I also tell them, like, start maybe journaling, so that if you know that, okay, today this was what I was feeling, and you kind of write it down, then the sense that, oh, I had a very bad day might be a little less, right? Because otherwise they tend to think that every day was bad. So I ask them, okay, how bad was it? Was it better than yesterday? So then they start feeling that, oh, okay, so all they have to do is catalog. So I tell them that journaling does not mean that you pour your heart out. You can just catalog, oh, this was happening, this was happening, this was happening. So then when you come back to me and tell me that, oh, see, so many days this happened, then they feel like, oh, okay, this is again a good way of kind of me feeling in control of my anxiety. And so that's also something that I can, a small tip that anybody can start doing at, even now. But of course, like you said, it is very important to kind of not replace treatment with healthy everyday lifestyle tips. It's very, very important. And yeah, I think, if you and I can continue talking, your family will throw you out, and mine will completely disown me, and nobody's going to start listening to us ever again. So I think we can continue talking, but we must stop.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll come back to you with another interesting topic on mental health soon. But till then, this is Shrinks Sharing signing off. Bye and have a nice time.
Bye.